I wanted to start though with the news that's been obviously preoccupying all of us for these past weeks, the war in Ukraine. You were a co-signatory to a letter earlier this month urging the banning of Russian and Belarusian athletes from international events. And as that conflict grinds on, I wanted to ask you, how effective and important do you think the cultural aspects of the sanctions imposed upon Russia?
Well, we have had a clear view when it comes to the sanctions that we are not in conflict with the Russian people. We are not in conflict with Russian athletes or Russian artists. In fact, the cultural cooperation and people-to-people cooperation is important also during this conflict. But we have, together with many other countries, said loud and clear that elite athletes on a professional level will not be able to attend big arrangements in Norway. Yeah, that's correct.
And do you think then culture as a kind of tool there is going to be effective?
A culture
as a tool in sanctioning Russia and kind of conveying this message, a political message, of course, to the Russian government?
Well, we do not sanction Russian culture, we sanction the Russian government. That's an important difference there. The Norwegian cultural institutions, they are free to do as they want. Several institutions have already said that they do not want to continue with their cooperation with Russian institutions, but some are. That's how it should be. The cultural institutions should be free and not run by the government, and it's up to them how they now cooperate or do not cooperate with Russian institutions and Russian artists, actually.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to broaden out really just about this question of culture and the role it plays in the other half of your brief. You are the Minister for Culture and Equality. So could you talk a little bit about the role that culture plays in promoting equality?
Yes, I think culture and equality is two political subjects that go really good together. I think culture is, of course, important in our lives. It's important for the livelihood in our local communities. It gives us something to live for, actually, and then enriches our lives. But it's also important when it comes to preaching and creating gender equality and equality in a whole, because I think that it's the cultural scene, it's artists that always are in the front line when it comes to making progress. And we know that artists and the art are much more diverse and much more equal and preaches these values much more than several other parts of society. So I think the culture and the arts are really in the forefront of driving society in the right direction.
Do you think perhaps then some of the cultural initiatives might be a more powerful way to create change in society than perhaps any other sort of government initiatives that you might do, things like quotas, which maybe we'll come to later?
I think we need both, actually, but you're absolutely right that the arts and culture and artists, they speak to people in a different way than politicians do, than newspaper articles do, or political tools do. So it's a really important scene for communicating gender equality and diversity out to people. Yeah, in different words with different.
I wanted to bring in the question about the effect of the pandemic here as well, because of course culture was something that ground to a halt along with much of the rest of the world. What effect has that had on your work promoting equality, and broadly the pandemic? What has been the effect of COVID on the task of making a more equal society in Norway and beyond as well?
I think every country throughout the world has been affected by the pandemics, and that's everyone has witnessed that the pandemic has had a really backlash when it comes to gender equality, and especially the gender role patterns have been reinforced during the crisis. And we see that in Norway as well, when the the society shut down and people went home, having to do their job at home, having their kids at home, we saw that clearly women took most of the responsibility for the family to keep it all together as well as their own jobs. So that's one thing we see clearly, but also more that I'm worried about is the effect the pandemics have had on the typical the work life that women typically attend. You know that health care workers have been in the forefront during the crisis. It's the type of jobs that already was hard to do, that gets a little too less paid. Yeah, and we need to lift these women up, and they have really been in the forefront in the fight against the pandemics, and that gives us an opportunity to show people the value of these working groups, and that we have to strengthen.
Just picking up on the question of COVID's effect then, obviously and you mentioned about how working patterns have disadvantaged perhaps women, and obviously the world of work has been upended and reimagined in many places. Might actually the after effects of COVID be to accelerate a more equal environment in the workplace? Might that be a bit of a silver lining perhaps?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think everyone has opened their eyes for the importance of these jobs that mainly women do in the healthcare sector, etc., and that we need to raise salaries, we need to better working conditions, etc. And right now in Norway, we are taking some initiatives to make part-time work. To make full-time work. I'm sorry. The norm in the labor force and work life throughout some legal bills. That's because we see that in Norway the working force is really gender segregated actually.
I guess one thing about companies as well and how they operate is, of course, the management. And I'm aware that Norway introduced this question of quotas on boards way back in 2008. I'd just be curious why Norway went for this option. Was progress too slow without setting a quota, and how would you say that initiative has worked out?
Yeah, the reason why we introduced that was obviously because, we've been speaking about the need for more gender equal businesses for a long time, for decades, but nothing was happening. It was going too slow. So when the quota system was introduced, it was really controversial, but during a couple of years, we saw that it worked. It did increase women's participation in businesses, and people have accepted it. So it's kind of one of the few quick fix tools we actually have to solve a gender problem. So it's really not controversial anymore, and it has worked.
And the effect on those companies, are you measuring that? So do they perform better? Are they more likely to have more inclusive policies for their entire workforce? Is there a sort of trickle-down effect from the board into the rest of the organization? Is that something you see?
Yes, absolutely. And I think gender equality and diversity in businesses is not only the right thing to do, it's a smart thing to do. And we know that businesses who are more diverse, who focus on a more gender balanced workforce, they also do better. So that's really something that helps the whole business, not only something you do to act right. And I think that's really something that Norwegian businesses know, and therefore they strive to be more diverse and to be gender equal. Yeah, it affects everything.
Absolutely. What else can the government do then? So a quota is, as you said, it's a quick fix you can put in place and you'll get a tangible outcome. Some of those other hurdles, particularly that women face in progressing up organizations, to do with flexibility, with time out, what can the government do, or what more measures can you do to fix the equality gender-wise all the way through a company, through the different ranks?
I just received a report that says something that's really interesting. When it comes to women in leader positions in businesses, we see that we have mostly men on the top of the companies, not very many women. And I just received a report who says that it's not due to a lack of ambitions, it's not due to a lack of education. It's not due to a lack of talent, but something happens when we have children. And that's really interesting because it seems like when we have children, it gets too much for women. And men, CEOs and leaders of companies, they tend to have a partner at home who runs the family and runs the house and let them be able to work a lot. So I think it's really, really important that businesses take care of their employees and make a good working environment where you can actually work and take care of your family. That you can actually go to the kindergarten and pick up your children at 4:30, and that's okay. And then I think you will get more women high up in the system, actually. So to create a more a better balance between working life and family life, I think it's really, really important. And the Norwegian government do a lot to help in that way. We have quite a good parental leave in Norway. We have a quota for the mothers and we have a quota for the fathers, which actually gives the fathers a possibility, but also a duty to stay at home for 15 weeks when they have children, which actually we see that helps creating more balance in family life later on throughout the children's lives. Yeah.
What about pay? I want to talk about compensation because this is also really important. Even with all the initiatives that you've been involved in and your government for many years, there still is a gender pay gap. Why is that? Why is it so difficult to shift that? And what else might your government do to fix it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We still have a gender pay gap also in Norway. Norwegian women, we earn 87.5% of what men do. Some of that is mainly because we work in different sectors, female-dominated sectors such as healthcare, etc. And many women work part-time. But even if you correct for that, we see that we have a small gender pay gap. And one thing we do right now is we have introduced a new law that businesses, they have a duty to both put in action active targets to make the workplace more gender equality, and they have to report on that. And we also, from last year, businesses have to give out statistics on wages in the business, so you can actually see if you are in the right wage category. Yeah, that's an important tool for the employees, but also will at the end give us statistics to see how and where we should work on this.
Yeah, so that transparency question, I think, is a really interesting one, shining a light on salary levels. It's also very controversial in many places, isn't it? Did you talked about the quotas being controversial in the first place. How much pushback do you get from companies having to kind of reveal this data?
Well, not a lot, actually. I think one of the reasons why Norway is in the forefront when it comes to gender equality is that we use the social model, the dialogue between the government, the employers' unions, the employees' unions, that we come together, we see what's the problem and we fix it together. It's it's easier to introduce controversial laws when you do it together with the companies and not against them, actually. So it's not that controversial here in Norway. I think everyone sees that we have to do something about this problem, and they really want to participate.
You also have, of course, in Norway, the world's largest sovereign wealth fund, which I know is becoming increasingly activist, perhaps you could say, in this space, and wanting companies to invest in to boost women on boards. How important is that, or the sovereign wealth fund, as a partner for you, with the huge power of their investments behind you to incentivize companies, of course, to change, and whether it's promoting more women or their pay practices? Is that a very powerful tool?
Obviously, it's one of the world's largest funds, and we have to think about how we invest this money and what change we create when we shift investments from one sector to another. So we have a lot of it's independently run, of course, but we have a lot of guidelines for what we invest in and not. And of course, gender equality and sustainable development is important when it comes to this fund. Yeah.
The other big issue, obviously, and I know the fund is engaged with this question too, is of course on climate change. And this month you said that it's impossible to solve the climate crisis without gender equality. I thought that was a fascinating link. Could you expand on that a little bit and explain why you think there's such a close connection there?
Yeah, I think right now a lot of ministers and civil society is gathered in New York for the UN Commission on the Status of Women, and that's what they are discussing these days, the link between climate change and gender equality. And, you know, the climate change affects women and men differently. One example is that climate policy and investments, they tend to go to the more male-dominated sectors, such as science, technology, energy, and mathematics. And it is a possibility that if we don't do anything, that the climate change and investments and that the fact that technology and digitalization will be quite a big deal of the solution here will reinforce the gender diverse labor market, actually. So we need to get more women into tech. That's one example. That's the future. Of course, I don't need to tell you about the effects for, you know, women in the South driving the households, being on the fields, collecting the water, etc. Yeah. So we need to also have the gender glasses on when we think about climate change and the policy to change it.
Is that position, do you think, is talked about enough? I mean, I think, what can you do to continue to promote that message? Are you talking to your colleagues in other governments around Europe and around the world about this question?
Yeah, absolutely. And right now in New York, during the UN's Commission on the Status for Women, the Nordic countries have made a declaration and a roadmap to battle this, the climate change, also with the gender glasses on, and it's high on the agenda from the UN system, actually. And let's hope that will be the case for the COP also when that happens later this year. Yeah. So there's a rising awareness that this is the gender glasses when it comes to climate change is important.
It's perhaps hard at the moment to feel optimistic when looking at the news of the last few weeks and months, optimistic about the future. But perhaps as we kind of conclude the conversation, could you comment on the future? And if you are in fact optimistic about progress on equality, do you see a truly equal society in Norway and beyond in the coming years, or perhaps in our lifetimes?
Well, I think we have to be optimistic. We don't have a choice, but there's clearly some dark clouds out there, and we have seen a pushback or a backlash when it comes to equality during the corona crisis. And of course, with things happening in Ukraine right now, we have a lot of serious topics to discuss, and there's some really, really dark clouds out there right now. But I think, as you mentioned in the start, we'll have to use the opportunity to, when we rebuild work life and we rebuild society, to do it in a gender-just way.
And for the next year, what is your main goal as we go through 2022? COVID is potentially, hopefully, more in the rearview mirror for Europe. What do you hope to achieve this year with your government?
Well, as I said, we have just introduced a new law that gives businesses both a duty to put out active targets to make a more gender equal business, that they have to show their statistics on wages. We are working on a full-time law for full-time work, as I said, that we're going to implement to give more, especially women, the right to full-time, that's going to be the norm in the working life. So that's important things. I think that many of the keys to a more equal society lays in the labor force.
Well, we wish you all the best with those very important initiatives, and my warm thanks, Minister, for joining us today. Thank you so much.